The forge fire of destiny had tempered Gendry Baratheon's fate far beyond the anvil of Flea Bottom. Even as the years passed since he'd first learned of his royal blood, the very marrow of his bones still felt the heat of that first hammer's strike, the echo of his own heart forging new purpose in a world that had long denied him birthright. Now, standing upon the battlements of Storm's End, the sea wind tearing at his surcoat of black and gold, he could feel the storms gathering beyond the horizon, both in the heavens and in the hearts of men. He had been knighted on the eve of the second winter moon, by decree of Queen Daenerys herself. It was a ceremony simple and austere, held within the ancient hall where Lord Renly had once laughed and dined, yet rich with unspoken promise. Sir Gendry Baratheon, of the reborn Stormlands, it proclaimed. No more the bastard of King's Landing, no more the forger's apprentice on Smith's Row, hammer in hand but head in shadow. This was a new dawn, both terrifying and exhilarating. His knighting had come not through blood bestowed in false ceremony, but by fire and steel and need. The land cried out for a leader who belonged to its soil, and in his veins flowed that heritage. Even as the clang of spurs echoed off ancient stone, he had felt weight descend, not the weight of metal at his sides, but the mantle of expectation. To bear the Baratheon sigil was no trifling matter. It was to carry the memory of storm-tossed kings, of noble sacrifice and bitter pride. He recalled the silent gaze of Jon Snow, his half-brother, when the blade of honor was laid across his shoulder. The knowing look that said a man could never truly leave Winterfell in his blood, but that he could carry its lessons into new lands. And so Gendry vowed that night to uphold the honor of Storm's End, come tempest or siege. Daily life settled swiftly into routines, both familiar and alien. At dawn he walked the ramparts, the salt-laden air tangling in his dark hair as he watched gulls wheel upon the breeze. In days past he would have been content merely to observe. Now he issued commands. Troop musters, patrol assignments, inspections of grain stores. He moved among the common folk of the Stormlands, not as interloper but as lord. Though he never forgot the soot behind his fingernails, the burn of the forge's glow on his skin. Beneath the knightly tabard, he was that boy who had swung a hammer with all the fervor of a man possessed. He would bring the same fervor to governance. Lady Rosamund, heir to Tarth, arrived soon after his knighting, a small battalion in tow. Her presence was pragmatism and politics combined. Daughter of a powerful house, oft courted by those who wished the Stormlands united in purpose. Their first meeting in the great hall was polite and formal, with words measured and meanings half hidden. Yet as they rode the northern marches together, he in battered plate, she upon a snow-white mare, they spoke honestly of duty and fear. She confessed her dread that the Stormlands, so long fractured by petty lords and old vendettas, might splinter further under external threat. He admitted his uncertainty at rulership, that every decision felt like striking the wrong groove upon steel. She does not give us a choice, Gendry told Rosamund one wind-whipped evening as they sheltered under the parapet from a sudden squall. The Ironborn scour our shores, and the Crownlands watch our walls with jealous eyes. If we stand divided, shadow and sword will fell us both. Her eyes, pale as mist on the narrow sea, held his steady. Then we must make them see that unity is our strongest shield. Thus began the great reformation of the Stormlands. Gendry called a council that summoned small folk and knights alike, that set aside ancient grievances in favor of a shared cause. Baratheon wore banners flew beside banners of Dondarrion, Seaworth, Estermont, and countless others. He marshaled grain shipments to the coast, stocked the holdfasts with salted fish and cured meats, and commissioned scouts to keep watch from Cape Wrath to the Sleeping Sea. In the forges of Storm's End, he commanded smiths to reforging swords from old lances, each blade bearing the sigil of a house. A new to Baratheon cause. Yet even as his influence grew, so did the tempests in his mind. There were nights when sleep slipped from him, and he found himself at the forge once more, hammer raising sparks. He dreamt of the faces he had warred against, of the young lord whose pride had cost him a nephew's life, of the merchant whose ships he'd seized to feed a starving village. He knew that leadership required sacrifice, and that every boon he granted might sow resentment elsewhere. Among the heat and hammer, the tempest and the tide, he discovered something fundamental: that true knighthood was not in the shine of steel or the silks of court, but in the forging of trust. So he would walk among men, unarmored, listening. He rode into battered villages with a wheel of gold dragons for repair. He sat with widows in black linen, learning their names and their needs. News traveled swiftly in the Stormlands, carried by tongues as quick as ravens. Baratheon's hammer, they called him. That steeled his resolve, for both its meaning of forging and of destruction. When the small folk of Storm's End petitioned for rebuilding their huts after the spring floods, Gendry rode out with shovels and axes, working alongside them until his gauntlets bled. That image, his great frame bent in labor, became legend. The Night Lord who fought floods with spade as fiercely as he would fight invaders with sword. The common folk sang songs of him. Children carved his likeness in wood, and even the stony-faced commanders respected the vigor of his presence. But the true test would come with the arrival of House Estermon's fleet on a moonless night. An armada of 13 longships, their oars cut to staves, the iron-born crest barely visible in the gloom. They meant to plunder, confident in the isolation of the Stormlands. Gendry, summoned in haste, rode to the cliffs with a handful of knights, each man steel-clad but outnumbered. The sea thundered below, and the mist wreathed the crag like ghostly sentinels. In that moment he felt the weight of knighthood settle like a crown of iron upon his brow. Storm's End cannot fall, he whispered to himself, recalling the crash of waves against the walls where his ancestors had held at Robert's rebellion. He stretched forth his sword, the light of his courage brighter than any torch. "We hold!" A horn sounded across the mist, and the fleet halted. Gendry lifted his blade high, his voice carrying like thunder. "By right of storm and steel I claim these shores. Baratheon's blood shall not be spilt in shadow." What followed was the clash of axes against shields, the roar of wind and war. Yet as the first ironborn warrior leapt from a longship onto the rocky shore, Gendry met him in fury, hammer blow force in every stroke of his sword. Around him, knights rallied, their loyalty born not of ancient oath, but of something more profound: belief in the hammer-born knight who had turned his forge into the forge of their unity. In that night's grim embrace, the Stormlands found a leader not by birth alone, but by fire and fidelity. And as dawn broke on blood-tinted waves, the Ironborn lay defeated, their ships ablaze, their will broken upon the hard will of a single man who had been forged for greatness. From that victory would flow new alliances, new hope, and a legacy that would echo through halls of stone and hearts of men long after Gendry Baratheon took his final breath. The dawn that followed the rout of the Ironborn shone cold and silver, as if the very world were still stung by the violence of the night before. Gendry Baratheon stood atop the broken rampart, where the tide had washed iron and blood alike, the wind tearing at his cloak as if to remind him that storms, like fate, would always return. Beneath him lay the smoldering husks of Ironborn longships, their prows driven hard onto the rocks, the sea reclaiming their wrought iron plates one by one. Around him, his men moved with a quiet zeal, lifting the wounded, burying the dead, and preparing to ferry survivors back to their homes. Yet in every eye shone the same truth. Under Gendry's command, the Stormlands had survived another night. He turned at the sound of hoofbeats. Lady Rosamund of Tarth, her auburn hair braided with seafoam silk, rode forward on her mare, the banners of House Tarth fluttering behind her. In the hush of early morning, her voice was soft but steady. "They yield at last," she said, dismounting. She knelt to examine the head of an Ironborn oarsman, still groggy from the wave that broke his vessel. "They fought fiercely, but they fight no more." Gendry nodded, voice low. "Let them live. We do not conquer the Stormlands by spilling every drop of blood." He paused, surveying the shore. "Yet they will remember this day, and remember who stood against their storms." She met his gaze, respect, and something like fondness in her pale blue eyes. "You have given them a leader worth following." Even the broken ships cannot lie about what you've done here." A rallying cheer rose then, as the last survivors of the assault stumbled ashore. Prisoners, eyes downcast, but still alive. Gendry sheathed his sword, the weight of it strange in his gauntlet-gloved hand. He strode down the rampart steps, boots squelching in salt and ash, to stand before them. "Men of the Iron Isles," he called, voice carrying beyond the broken quay. "You came here to plunder and burn. Yet I offered you mercy, and still you come unbidden. Now you stand at the mercy of Storm's End." A hush. Then one Ironborn, bold or broken, lifted his chin. What mercy would a Baratheon know? Gendry met him, heart steady. "The mercy I would show my own kin. I give you 3 choices. Return to your homes and swear allegiance to the Storm King, repay what you have taken, and live in peace. Or remain here in chains until the parley in Storm's End, where you may stand trial by the laws of the land. The third, take ship west, and never return to these shores." "Then?" Murmurs ran through the group. The Ironborn captain spat into the sea. "We bend the knee to none." Gendry inclined his head once. "Then I see no further need for words." He reached for his sword, but Lady Rosamund touched his arm. His gaze flicked to her. She gave a slight shake of her head. In that moment, he saw the finer edge of mercy, to show them the strength to choose life, however dishonorable. "Take them," he said to his knights, voice quiet. "But unbind them. Let them sail away." Gasps rose among his men. He turned back to the Ironborn. "You're free to go. Return to the Isles and tell your lords that Storm's End shows mercy to those who would live. But hear this. If you come again, there will be no freedom to offer." So it was that the Ironborn, humbled and amazed, were set back to their longships. The men of the Stormlands watched them push off, oars cutting the silent dawn. And for a moment, Gendry felt that the world could change, not with fire alone, but with the steadiness of honor. In the days that followed, word of his clemency spread faster than the ravens could carry news. Lords sent envoys bearing gifts: salted fish from Estermont, horses from Dondarrion, fine wool from the hills of Stony Sept, all tokens of newfound respect. Even the merchants of the Crownlands, ever watchful, dispatched traders under Baratheon banner, eager to open markets and fill the coffers of Storm's End. Gendry, once a craftsman at a forge, now grew accustomed to councils in the Great Hall. Arguments on tariffs and grain tithes, debates on the repair of coastal defenses, the training of septons to tend broken souls. He listened to the maester's reports with the same intensity that he once gave to shaping steel. Where he could, he applied common sense. Grain stores moved by caravan where sea routes were frozen. A portion of castle tithes waived for flood-ravaged villages, even the establishment of a smith's stipend for every village that lost its forge. Yet it was not all diplomacy. Rumors came from the north. A small force of Crownlander knights, led by Lord Hightower's second son, Sir Laurent, testing the boundaries of Baratheon authority. They seized a ferry on the Mander to extort tolls, believing the young Lord Commander too busy to respond. Gendry rode for the Mander, banner held high, and found the knights feasting on stolen saltfishes. He dismounted unnoticed, his armor pack behind him, and walked into their midst. Sir Laurent rose, wine goblet in hand. "If it isn't the Forge's son, awful pretender." Laughter rippled through the table. Gendry's gaze was calm. "You claim river tolls. Under whose authority?" Laurent sneered. "The Crown's. Winter never reaches this far south." Gendry's fingers curled. "Nor need it, when the Storm King's hand can reach you." Unseen by Laurent, a troop of Baratheon knights circled to cut off retreat. In a motion practiced at smithy and saddle, Gendry drew his longsword and laid its point at Laurent's throat. The table fell silent, the crackle of tension sharper than any bonfire. "Release your claim," Gendry said. "Return the goods. Refuse, and I'll have you tried for treason." Laurent's face drained of color. Around them the others muttered. None dared move. The Knight Commander stepped back, voice trembling. "Very well. The tolls are withdrawn." He saluted shakily. Gendry nodded, then turned and left. leaving the defeated knights to gather their spoils. By ride's end, smoke curled from every keep in the Stormlands as repairs began. Where once petty rivalries thwarted unity, now the Forge-born lord had welded purpose from broken oath and fractured pride. In the nights that followed, he would climb the ramparts alone, gazing north toward King's Landing, and wonder what new storms might rise. But with every wind that tore at his cloak, he felt the hammered strength of his resolve. That Storm's End would stand, and that he, Gendry Baratheon, would lead the Stormlands through storms yet unimagined. And in that knowledge lay the true power of a leader born not only of blood, but of fire and mercy alike. The sea mist had barely lifted when word came to Storm's End that a rider from Griffin's Roost bore urgent news. Gendry Baratheon, still clad in the battered plate that had seen him through both forge and battlefield, stood at the summit of the eastern tower as the herald arrived, raining with salt and spattered with brine. The rider dismounted, his greaves streaked with mud, and delivered his message with little ceremony. "Lord Baratheon," he panted, "the folk of the disputed marshes rise in arms. They claim that House Dondarrion's tax collectors have exacted more than their due, that they starve beneath the yoke of new levies. They threaten to march on Gallows Grey unless their grievances are redressed." Gendry's jaw tightened. The disputed marshes had long been a thorn in any ruler's side, a place where oaths held scant weight and lives were measured by yield from peat and reed. If left unchecked, their rebellion could embolden other pockets of unrest. Hightower's sons stirring discontent among the ferry tolls, the Dornish caravans testing border passes. Storm's End needed firm but fair leadership. Rumor of his mercy toward the Ironborn had begun to drift northward and westward, yet mercy without justice could be mistaken for weakness. He turned to Lady Rosamond, who had ridden with him from Tarth to serve as both counselor and lieutenant general in his fledgling command. Her eyes, sharp as the lances poised above their banners, met his. "What think you, Sir Gendry?" she asked. "Will the disputed marshes heed reason, or must we ride for Gallows Grey in force?" He paused, recalling how swiftly an uneasy cavalry charge through the reeds could turn marshmen into ghosts in the tall grass. He raised his gaze to the horizon, where the lazy coils of dawn's light still tangled with low-hanging fog. "I will ride there myself," he said at last, voice firm. "We will hear their leader's complaint, and if it proves false, we show them swift justice. But if their claim has merit, we grant redress and bind them anew to Storm's End. We cannot allow them to think that rebellion is met equally with steel and silence." Rosamund inclined her head. "Then let us muster light cavalry and ride by midday tide. I will summon Captain Varen to prepare boats to cross Blackwater Bay if needed." By the time the sun broke clear of heavy clouds, Gendry had donned mail and leather, leaving his great helm behind. He preferred the wind upon his dark hair, unblunted by iron. A small escort of 50 knights and mounted pages assembled before the gatehouse. Among them were men he had personally trained. Men who had once been smiths' apprentices or fishermen's sons, now bearing surcoats of black and gold. He acknowledged each with a curt nod. As they set out down the serpentine causeway, Storm's End fell away behind them, its gray walls rising like a promise against the sky. Though Gendry's heart had been forged in the fires of rebellion and tested in the crucible of war, there remained within him a relentless curiosity about the lands beyond his keep. The villages where windmills turned ceaselessly in the breeze, fields of deep rye ready for harvest, and the marshes themselves, where reeds whispered secrets in every gust. Their path wound through the lowlands toward Gwyn Cliffs, where the marsh waters met furthest inland. Along the way, they encountered refugee families displaced by winter floods, women whose children clung to their skirts, men who had lost livestock to wolf packs emboldened by hunger. Gendry halted the column and stepped down, moving among them as he had among the survivors of the Ironborn raid. He knelt by a weeping widow whose home had been swept away by spring tide. He listened as she told him of her husband, lost in the reeds, and her fears that no man would answer her plea. He took from his pouch a handful of coins, enough to repair the roof of her cottage once a temporary frame could be built, and pressed them into her hands. Tell the builders that Baratheon coin is as good as his word, he said softly. The peasant's eyes widened. She kissed the coins as though they were molded of gold. Gendry stood, brushing the tears from his own cheek, and remounted. We ride on, he declared to his knights. Let none say that Storm's End leaves its people friendless in flood and fury. Hours later, the marshes rose before them, a vast expanse of peat bog and shallow lagoons, threaded by winding channels. A lookout, atop a makeshift wooden turret, spied their approach and sounded a horn. The column halted at the fringes of dry land, where a dais of bulldozed earth formed a rudimentary courtyard. From this vantage, Gendry could see a throng of marsh folk gathered, men with leather jerkins, women clad in homespun wool, children perched on shoulders. At their head stood a wiry man in a greasy coat, his boots sunk ankle-deep in mud. He advanced to meet Gendry's envoy, Sir Rollo Mervyn, a knight Gendry had knighted the prior winter. They spoke in hushed tones until Rollo fell silent and bowed. Gendry rode forward alone, drawing no sword, intending to face them with the same openness he demanded of himself. "Marsh Lord," he called, voice ringing clear over the croak of frogs and the drone of insects. "I come as Gendry Baratheon, knight and lord of the Stormlands. I seek to understand your grievance and to grant you audience under my banner." "Then no wanden," the wiry man spat to one side. "We call no stranger, Marsh Lord. Name yourself if you would speak with me." Gendry shifted in the saddle. "I am Gendry Baratheon. Once a bastard of King's Landing, now knighted and sworn to protect these lands and their people." A murmur ran through the crowd. The man's eyes flicked, sizing him as one might a horse to buy at auction. Then he turned, spine stiff. "I am Joran Peatclaw, captain of the disputed marshes. We paid tithe to Lord Dondarrion each season as oath required, but now his collectors demand 1/10 more. Reed and Peat cannot feed our bellies if he takes 2/9. They say it is the levy of the Storm King. We say it is theft." "Then," Gendry dismounted, leaving his men arrayed in disciplined rank behind him. He stepped forward into the mud. "Show me the writ by which you are taxed." Peatclaw's men shifted uneasily. A young boy handed a scrap of faded parchment, sealed with the green stag of Dondarrion. Gendry took it, squinting under the morning light. The writ authorized a special levy to rebuild Dondarrion's bridge at Blackwater Head, which had collapsed under winter ice. But the sum appeared inflated, and the portion of the marshers labeled as contributory was broader than any prior census. "This writ was issued without your consent?" Gendry asked, reading the scrawl of a low-born scribe. Peatclaw's face knit. "We asked for meeting of lords and commoners, an auction of resources by voice and vote. They sent us writs instead of representatives." Gendry nodded, sliding the parchment into his leather pouch. "Stand down your arms, and at dusk I will ride with you to Gallows Grey. There I will convene a council of Dondarrion men and marshers alike. If the levy proves unfair, it will be rescinded and recompense offered. If it is rightful, then you must pay or yield to law. Is that acceptable?" A silence stretched between them, broken by the distant cry of seabirds. Peatclaw studied Gendry's face, then relaxed his shoulders. "Give us your word, son of the Forge, and we will yield swords until justice is done." Gendry extended a gauntlet-gloved hand. "On my honor as knight and lord, nothing less will be done." In that moment, as steel met leather, the dream of unity in his heart flickered stronger. He remounted amid subdued cheers, and led his column through reedy paths toward Gallows Grey, the seat of House Dondarrion. The keep rose above the marsh, like a crown of white stone, its towers etched into the sky. Sir Delson Dondarrion, lean and austere, awaited them on the drawbridge. His armor bore the green stag, pristine as fresh-cut leaves. The two knights faced one another across the gap. Gendry Baratheon," Delson said, voice measured. "I welcome you to my halls. I have heard of your mercy in the Isles. Mayhap too much mercy if you set men free at every turn." Gendry inclined his head. "I welcome you, Sir Delson. I come to mediate dispute, not to condemn either side. The marshers claim unfair levy, I offer counsel. Let justice be done." Delson's gaze flicked northward toward his stables. "My brother guards the bridge as writ demands. If recompense is due, it will be paid in coin or kind. Yet the Marshers must not be emboldened to think tax collectors brutes to be bargained with like tavern wenches." "Da." Gendry bared his throat in a brief bow. "I ask only that both sides speak before my council. Then law will stand or be revised." The great hall's oaken doors swung open to admit them. Flickering braziers cast gold light on tapestries depicting Dondarrion ancestors, fell in Robert's rebellion. On a long dais, Marshers and knights assembled. Reed-skirted peasants with wary eyes, squires in polished greaves, continued to those in half-mail. Gendry took the high seat, flanked by Rosamund and Delson. The murmur hushed as Sir Rollo cleared his throat. "This council meets by authority of Storm's End," Rollo intoned. "Present your claims, Marshers." One by one they rose to speak. The widower whose peat harvest had been seized. The mother whose child had gone hungry as her oath-bound grain was levied beyond yield. The young scribe whose runes were blotted by Dondarrion steward's authority. Then Delson rose, speaking with the calm certainty of ancient oath. That the bridge's fall had cut commercial arteries, and that a 1/10 levy was but a fraction of Dondarrion's burden in coin and man. Hours passed in voice and rebuttal. Gendry weighed each plea. The crack in a widow's voice. The silky confidence of a knight by birth. Though the crowd leaned toward the marshmen's side, anger at distant rule ran deep. He sensed that complete repeal of levy would leave the bridge unrestored, choking trade and risking further disaster when tides rose. Lord Dondarrion needed support, though not bounty. When at last the debate waned, Gendry rose. His cloak, dark with dust and damp, trailed behind him. Silence stilled even the torch flames as he addressed both sides. "Let the levy stand at 3%, rather than 10, until the bridge is rebuilt," he declared. 70% of this sum will repair the stonework. The remainder will feed your people through winter. After completion, the toll on carts crossing the bridge shall provide the remainder needed, and no further levy will fall upon you. Marshers, you will pay this until the bridge stands. Lord Dondarrion, you will ensure your collectors do not exceed this decree. Do either of you dissent?" "And." Delson exchanged glances with the marsh captain. Peatclaw, mud-caked and trembling, nodded. The knights behind Gendry murmured approval. Some peasant women wept relief. Sir Delson bowed. "I consent, on condition that the first payments begin at the next full moon." Gendry enclosed his palms. So settled. He turned to Peatclaw. "And you, Marsh Captain, will keep order among your people. Any who flout this accord will be tried by Storm's End." "No." Peatclaw stooped and proffered the same oath he had sworn on the march. "By mud and reed, I bind my blades to Storm's End." The room roared its assent. When the council dispersed, Gendry lingered in the hall's dusky gloom. Rosamund found him by a torch whose flame bent toward the stone. "You handled that with both steel and grace," she said. "The Marshes will remember this as the day Gendry Baratheon spoke justice." He exhaled, rubbing his wrists. "Merely by hearing them, I gave them hope. Sometimes hope weighs heavier than any swords." "Down?" She touched his elbow, guiding him out into the courtyard where the sentries rotated at their posts. "We have earned that hope," she whispered. "And with hope, we will bind the Stormlands to you." As dusk fell, Gendry rode back to Storm's End with the Marsher's representative in his party. The wind bore the tang of coming winter, sharpening his senses. Behind him, the lands he had pledged to lead, marsh, coast, and keep, lay unified, if only by a fragile accord. He felt in his chest the bright pulse of destiny, an ember glowing beneath forged iron. Ahead lay kings in exile, iron-born plots half buried, and the ever-present specter of winter's return. Yet as he rode through the turning leaves, Gendry Baratheon, Knight of Storm's End, felt the strength of his own forging, and the first stirrings of a kingdom reborn under hammer and honor. The ride back to Storm's End was a somber procession beneath bruised skies, the horses' hooves slushing through mud softened by autumn's rains. Gendry rode near the head of the column, the Marsher Joran Peatclaw at his side. Between them lay the treaty they had brokered, 3% on harvests and reed sales, a fair toll on the rebuilt bridge, a promise that no further levies would fall upon the disputed marshes. Yet in every bent reed and quaking sapling, Gendry felt the tension of minds unaccustomed to peace. When at last the towers of Storm's End rose before them, dark and brooding on their rocky isle, a cheer went up that echoed along the causeway. The garrison's banners, black stag on gold, snapped in the wind, and trumpets blared from the battlements. For a fleeting moment, Gendry allowed himself a thrill of triumph. But he quelled it. Treaties required enforcement. Unity must be nurtured. He turned to Peatclaw. "Ride with me into the keep," he said. "We will see to their lodging and send word to Sir Delson that his marshers may harvest without harassment." Peatclaw inclined his head, new respect in his mud-splattered face. "I never thought I'd see such a sight. My men inside Storm's End without fetters on their wrists." Gendry smiled wryly. "Let them sleep on tapestries rather than in chains. Tomorrow they'll bless the reprieve you won them. And remember that a lord of the Stormlands keeps his word." Inside the shadowed warmth of the solar, robed servants bustled with meal and ale. Gendry joined Peatclaw at a long table, setting down the treaty scroll. He signaled to a steward, who brought thick slices of salt beef and bowls of crisp turnips. "He ate," Gendry commanded. "The road wears a man more than any draft in the holdfast." Peatclaw hesitated, hand hovering above his bowl. Then, with a nod, he began to eat, his eyes never leaving Gendry's face. "I see now why the people speak of you in the same breath as old Storm's King Robert. A man born of low station, yet you wear knighthood more naturally than half the blooded lords I've known." Gendry laughed, taking a long draught of ale. "A forge flame tempers steel, but it does not guarantee the bearing of a knight. I learned humility among the hammers, but mercy, that I had to learn here, on the march, in the face of hungry eyes." "Thou." The two men ate in companionable silence until the last scraps were gone. Servants cleared the table, and Gendry stood. "You will rest tonight in the solar. Come dawn you and I ride to Gallows Grey to inspect the bridge's foundations and speak with Master Builder Corinth the White." Peatclaw bowed. "I am yours to command, Lord Baratheon." Gendry paused, considering. "Tonight, you will sleep. Tomorrow, we ride as equals. Marsh Captain and Storm's Lord, each answerable to the other under Storm's End's laws." "Da." A fierce pride lit in Peatclaw's eyes. "That I will do." Dawn found Gendry awake before the sun, restless with purpose. He donned a simple gambeson over his mail, the breastplate strapped beside his saddle. By the time Peatclaw and Lady Rosamund joined him in the courtyard, a silver fog clung to the walls, and the sentries' breaths drifted like small clouds. "Master Builder Corinth awaits us at the bridge," Gendry called. "I wish to see how his masons have progressed." As they rode out, a detachment of marshers parted to allow their captain passage, while knights of Storm's End formed protective flanks. The journey to Gallows Grey took half a day, the road narrowing into planks laid over marsh channels. Here and there, Gendry paused to test rotted boards, ordering replacements where timbers sagged. At midday, they reached the wide span of the broken bridge that had once carried trade between marsh and mainland. Master Builder Corinth, a gaunt man with white hair and sharp eyes, stood atop the crumbling parapet with a leather-bound ledger in hand. His apprentices labored below, hauling stone blocks from makeshift barges. "Lord Baratheon," Corinth called, bowing. "Good morning. We have laid 2 arches worth of coursed stone, enough to bear light carts by the next moon." Gendry climbed the scaffolding to stand beside him, peering down at the columns of stone rising from the water. "The mortar, how does it fare against the tide?" Corinth tapped his ledger. "We've used quicklime reinforced with crushed oyster shell, proven in wet foundations. It sets firmer the longer it's submerged. The apprentices test each course with bar chisels. Cracks under 7 strokes are discarded." Gendry nodded, impressed. "Good work." Sir Delson's levy will fund more barges tomorrow. I want the eastern arch to stand before winter's solstice. Corinth's eyes gleamed. We'll see it done, my lord. Leaving the builder to his calculations, Gendry strode to the center of the bridge, where the broken keel of an ironborn galley lay half buried in silt. He ran a finger along the splintered wood, recalling the heat of battle, the cries of men. Here had raged conflict. Here would stand peace. He called to Peatclaw. See that your people learn not to fear these stones, but to respect them. Each course laid is a promise repaid. Peatclaw clasped his shoulder. They will know, Sir Gendry. They will know. By afternoon, the sun burned bright enough to dry the midday mists. Gendry and his party returned to Storm's End, where a council awaited to plan winter stores. In the council chamber, scribes pored over grain ledgers, captains discussed patrol rotations, and Rosamund proposed sending septons to tend to the widows of the Ironborn raid. Gendry listened to each report, his brow furrowed. When at last the hall quieted, he stood. We have agreements in place for levy and labor. We have the bridge half built and merchants eager to trade. But winter approaches, harder in these shores than any blade. I command that for every lord's levy this season, 1 month's worth of grain be set aside in the communal grain house. Should famine stalk our shores, it will find only locks and walls, not empty stomachs. Benini. There was a murmur. Some nods. Some surprised glances. Rosamund smiled warmly at him. Corinth, arriving late, blinked at the bold proposal. A wise precaution, said Sir Rollo. We'll need enough salted meat, too. Gendry nodded to the master-at-arms. Increase hunts along the coast roads. Deer and wild boar shall fill our larders. The price of venison at market will remain fixed. No profiteers under penalty of law. Sir Delson, seated beside the grainmaster, raised a hand. My granaries could spare 2 ships' worth. I volunteer them now. Gendry clasped Delson's forearm. House Dondarrion's generosity underwrites our unity. I thank you. As the council dispersed, Peatclaw approached Gendry in the corridor. My lord, he said quietly, some among the marshers still whisper of revolt. Should they be overcharged, they say, by secret collectors. Gendry's jaw clenched. Then we root out such collectors. I will ride tomorrow to inspect the tithe records and weed out any who have cheated. No man collects coin in Storm's End without my sight upon him. Beanto. Peatclaw bowed. I will accompany you. The next morning found Gendry and Peatclaw in the dusty offices of the tithe hall. Ledgers stacked like towers around them. Scribes in charcoal-stained robes watched nervously as Gendry inspected entries line by line, searching for discrepancies. He paused at a column marked Marsh Reads, where quantities seemed inflated against deliveries recorded at Griffin's Roost. He looked up at the clerk. Who oversaw these counts? The clerk swallowed. Sir Mirren's men. I mean, the collectors appointed by House Dondarrion. Gendry exchanged a glance with Peatclaw. Fetch Sir Delson's steward. I will have him compare this against his bridge contributions. Within the hour, the steward arrived, spectacles perched on his nose, and together, they reconciled numbers. A dozen entries proved false, land claims spurious, reed weights padded. Gendry pronounced each sheet invalid, and summoned the responsible collectors. They came, men in green and silver tabard, blustering at first until Gendry laid out the evidence. One by one they confessed or wept. Gendry decreed that they be stripped of rank, publicly whipped, then set to rebuild the stone arches they had sought to avoid funding. From the throng a hush fell. Not one dared profit again beneath his gaze. Peatclaw clapped Gendry on the shoulder. You've given them law and shown them justice. Gendry sheathed his sword. Law must be swift and fair. Only then will the Stormlands stand as one. As winter's first snow dusted Storm's End's battlements, Gendry stood upon the walls, watching the world turn pale. In the distance, the bridge's arches gleamed like ivory against the water. The marshes lay silent under their hush of white. The sea beyond was a ribbon of steel. In his heart, he felt the divide between forged bastard and rightful lord fading as surely as night gives way to dawn. Below, the banners fluttered, black stag on gold under them, the green stag of Dondarrion and the deep blue of Tarth, the sea silver of Estermont, the crimson of Dondarrion's knights. They were many colors, but the wind united them over a single keep. Gendry closed his eyes, recalled the boy at Smith's Row, and felt gratitude for the forge that had shaped not just steel, but the metal of his soul. Beyond the walls lay unknown challenges. The crown's politics, whispers of unrest beyond the narrow sea, the ever-watchful eyes of Queen Daenerys, whose aid had knighted him but whose favor could wane. Yet for this winter, and perhaps many winters after, Gendry Baratheon would hold the Stormlands together with hammer, heart, and honor. And in that forging, a new legacy was writing itself into the stones and scrolls of Westeros. Gendry Baratheon did not see the first flakes fall. They drifted down upon him like silent benedictions as he rode the narrow battlements of Storm's End at twilight. The wind had shifted to biting north, carrying with it the promise of deep winter. But in Gendry's chest burned a warmth born of purpose. Below his feet, the stones of the ancient fortress held firm, a testament not just to mortar and iron, but to the resolve of men who believed in something larger than themselves. His thoughts turned to the forging of unity across the Stormlands, to the humbled ironborn given ships of mercy, to the marshers whose voices had reshaped Levy, to the stalwart knights who had tested his unorthodox rule and found in him a leader rather than a boy in borrowed plate. He raised his gauntlet to catch a flake, then let it melt against his palm. Each was unique and fleeting, like the piece he had stitched together by steel and compassion. From the gatehouse below came the rumble of hooves, Rosamund riding hard, her mare's breath misting in the twilight. He waited as she dismounted, cloak whipping, face flushed with cold and purpose. "Rallies from the villages," she panted. "Bandits haunt the eastern road. Stragglers from the Iron Isles, no doubt emboldened by our mercy and thinking the Stormlands undefended." Gendry narrowed his eyes. "Then they shall learn that mercy does not invite havoc. Gather 20 of my knights and meet me at the postern gate within the hour." She inclined her head and slipped away. Gendry turned, lifting his lantern to the sentry at his elbow. "Sir," he said quietly, "secure the gates and send riders to summon Sir Rollo and Captain Varen. We ride for the Eastern Pass." The man saluted and vanished into the gloom. Gendry mounted, the weight of responsibility settling around him like a second cloak. In the yard below, he saw torches flare as knights gathered. In their eyes, a sharpened eagerness. They believed in him. By moonrise, 26 mounted knights. Sir Rollo Mervyn among them, raced eastward along the causeway cutting through salt marshes. The wind whipped so fiercely it seemed to gallop beside them, and the horses plowed through bogging paths as though wading chest-deep streams. When at last the flicker of torchlight revealed a ruined tall house half buried in drifted reed, the party slowed to a cautious walk. Crouched among the reeds lay 3 figures, ragged men in leathers stained with salt, their eyes reflecting torchlight like hungry wolves. They rose as the knights emerged, iron blades clenched, but one lifted a hand and called out hoarsely, "Mercy, Baratheon dog. We only want passage and food." "No." Gendry rode to the front, his sword unsheathed but held low. "Bandits," he growled, "prey upon merchants and peasants alike. You will relinquish your blades and surrender." The tallest of the 3 spat into the mud. "Surrender? To a forge-born lord? We choose mercy for ourselves and death for those we rob." He lunged, and Gendry met him in a flash of steel. Sparks flew as metal rang on steel. At his side, Sir Rollo cut down the second assailant. The third, visibly shaken by the ferocity of the Night Lord's defense, dropped his sword and fell to his knees. "Do with me what you will," he gasped. Gendry paused, recalling the mercy shown to the Ironborn weeks ago. "Bind him," he commanded. "He and any who took coin from travelers will walk the walls at dawn and return what they stole, or hang." The survivors knelt, teeth chattering, as his men searched their saddlebags. A few silver stags, some salted fish, a merchant seal. When the spoils were laid out upon the reeds, Gendry swept them into his saddlebag. "We ride to Morning Point," he announced. There you will restore to the Merchant Guild and swear oath to Storm's End. Fail, and the wall will be your gallows. So. He turned his horse, torchlight reflecting in his dark eyes. Let this be known. Any who think to prey upon these roads will find my mercy sharp as any blade. The dawn found Gendry overseeing the return of stolen goods at Morning Point, a small village perched on a rocky outcrop where road met sea. Merchants and fishermen gathered, incredulous to see Baratheon knights distributing spoils. Woolen cloaks, sacks of grain, gold coins. Children cheered. Mothers wept soft tears. Old men shook their heads at such unexpected justice. Lady Rosamund, standing beside him, rested a hand on his arm. You turn thieves into heroes in their own eyes, my lord. He smiled tiredly, watching a merchant embrace a bandit as he handed him back his signet ring. Better that they learn honesty than die in disgrace. This land will bend to firm justice and generous mercy. She nodded, eyes bright with shared conviction. And they will speak of this for generations. Gendry's gaze swept sea and sky. To the west, the cliffs of Tarth lay white in dawn's light. To the north, the Dondarrion bridge's arches gleamed triumphantly. Beyond lay the wider world. King's Landing's intrigues, Daenerys' shifting court, the unknown threats on the narrow sea. But for this moment, his realm Storm's End and its windswept territories stood as one beneath his banner. He reached into his cloak for a scrap of parchment, smoothed the edges, and handed it to Rosamund. Send this to every holdfast, he said. Proclamation of the Eastern Accord. Daft repaid with mercy. Roads safe under Storm's End. Let no man doubt that the Stormlands stand as one, led by a hammer-born lord. And no one. As the first rays of sun lit up the banners overhead, Gendry Baratheon felt the pulse of destiny as surely as any forge might temper a blade. In the hush of dawn, with salt wind and winter's breath in his lungs, he vowed to carry this unity further still, through storm and siege, oath and order, until the Stormlands were more than fractured holdings, but a single kingdom under his steady hand. And so, the hammer of Baratheon rose again, herald of a new age written in stone and blood, and unyielding justice. One. The riders who came to Storm's End after that dawn proclamation brought tidings of change. House Bar Emmon of Sharp Point had opened their markets to Storm's End's merchants. The lords of Cape Wrath offered timber and pitch for shipbuilding, and the Blackfire Pretenders' banners flickered briefly in the Riverlands before dissolving in rumor. From every corner of the Stormlands, voices rose to acclaim a lord who governed not with the cold hand of fear, but the steady hammer of justice. Yet Gendry Baratheon knew that such momentum, like any storm, must be guided lest it spin into chaos. He convened a great council in the Hall of Storm's End, assembling knights, small folk, envoys, and septons alike. Torches burned bright against the stone walls, banners of the allied houses hanging overhead, stag and crest bared in silent witness. At the dais, Gendry rose, his armor set aside in favor of a simple surcoat, bearing the black stag upon gold. He cleared his throat, and the murmurs subsided. Today, he began, we stand on the threshold of winter and renewal alike. The Stormlands have known war and want for too long. We have fought off invaders, tamed our marshes, and restored our roads. Yet every victory brings fresh trials. His voice, resonant and clear, carried through the hall. I propose the forging of the Storm Council, a body of 20 from every region, sworn to meet each season to deliberate law, levy, and defense. Not only lords and knights, but stewards, blacksmiths, fisherfolk, and maesters. Each will speak for their people, and no decree may stand without their assent. A hush fell as the implications settled in. A council that bound lord and peasant alike. An unprecedented union of voices. From one corner, the grizzled face of Sir Harlan Dondarrion hardened. From another, the soft gaze of a merchant priest lingered with intrigue. Then, slowly, Lady Rosamund rose. If the Storm Council stands, then we entrench the unity we have bled to achieve. My house pledges its seats and its service. One by one, representatives rose. the bold voice of the Fishermen's Guild of Sharp Point, the linen weaver from Stony Sept, the widow whose reed boats had reopened trade, the septon who'd tended the wounded from Ironborn's raid. When at last every corner had spoken, and silence returned, Gendry lifted a hand. So it shall be. Let writs ride forth to every holdfast to name their chosen. We shall meet on the eve of the solstice, with full powers to legislate and levy. Until then, hold fast your lands and your vows. He paused, gaze sweeping the hall. Know too, that our new code will bind all to the common good. Thieves shall be tried by peers of their choosing, tax disputes by everyman's vote, and feuds settled by council or trial by arms at my command. The age of petty lordships ends here. The age of the Stormlands united begins. Cheers filled the chamber, echoing off the vaulted ceilings like thunder. Gendry allowed himself a small smile, though his heart thrummed at the enormity of this new structure. He descended the dais, clasping hands and offering nods, mindful that leadership meant ear to every concern, shoulder to every burden. After the council's adjournment, he and Rosamund walked the galleries beneath a canopy of carved griffins. She rested her hand on his arm. You have reshaped more than politics tonight. You have reshaped belief. He nodded, gazing out through an arrow slit at the crashing waves. Belief and duty entwined. But words are wind. We must see this council through its first winter, before any man believes power rests not in him alone. Ben? Rosamund turned to him, sea light in her eyes. Then let us prepare. I will dispatch riders to every village to organize elections and to train marshals for council summoning. You must ready laws and writs. Gendry exhaled. And I must write them. Come dawn we begin. In the ensuing weeks, Storm's End transformed into a hive of activity. Blacksmiths forged scroll cases and seals. Scribes labored by candlelight drafting the storm code. Envoys rode out to holdfasts, instructing commoners in the rights of choosing delegates. Gendry spent long days conferring with masters on logistics, consulting admiralty captains on coastal defense, and convening judges to structure the trial system. At night he returned to the keep's lowest smithy, hammer in hand, letting the rhythm of steel upon steel clear his thoughts. The fires that had once tempered his body now tempered his mind. Winter fell at last, bringing pale dawns and early dusk. Snow blanketed the causeway, and Icefang, his destrier bred in the Stormlands north, tramped heavily through drifts, wafting like ghostly banners. Gendry rode out to inspect the grain stores had commanded filled. Great barns lined with sacks of rye and barley, coastal cellars heavy with salted fish, and mountain stores of smoked venison. Each was marked with the seals of Storm's End and distributed to keepers sworn to share stock in times of need. He watched as peasants filled baskets, their laughter ringing like bells in the frosty air. Even this harsh season bent beneath his will. Then came the day of the first Storm Council. Delegates gathered under great pavilions pitched in the courtyard. Men and women in homespun cloaks, stewards in fur-lined coats, knights in their tabards, maesters in grey robes. Gendry took the high chair upon a dais flanked by Rosamund and Sir Rollo. He stood, clearing the snow from his cloak. People of the Stormlands, he said, you are here as equals in purpose, though in birth and station you differ. Today, we enact laws that bind us all. Let no arrogance impede debate. Let no fear silence it. He struck a small hammer upon an iron anvil beside him, the ring echoing. By this hammer, I declare the first session of the Storm Council opened. Throughout the day, disputes were aired and settled. A disputed toll on the Redwater River reduced by half. A forest lord's right to fell oaks curtailed to preserve shipbuilding timber. Bandit raids near Crying Tree keep curbed by a joint ranger watch. Each decision, however modest, carried weight. It was forged by many, not imposed by one. When at last they ratified the Storm Code, a compendium of laws safeguarding trade, property, descent, and duty, Gendry leaned forward, eyes shining. Let this charter stand as testament to what men and women can achieve when honor binds them rather than fear. The Stormlands shall endure by law, by unity, and by the hammer of justice. He struck the anvil again, and the crowd erupted in applause. That night, Feasts blazed in every hall of Storm's End. Gendry and Rosamund danced among their people, laughter thawing the chill of winter's breath. They broke bread with fishermen and knights, with scholars and septons. In each face he saw the promise of a realm reborn. But Gendry's gaze always returned to the horizon, past Winterfell's distant spires, past King's Landing's red walls, to horizons uncharted. There were whispers of the Golden Company's approach, rumors of Queen Daenerys' peril, the faint stirrings of unrest in the Dornish marches. He was a lord risen from ash and hammer, capable of unifying the Stormlands. But would that be enough to shape the fate of Westeros? He pressed a final cup of spiced wine to his lips and smiled, the heat of the hearth beneath his boots and the fire of ambition within his chest. The Stormlands stood as one under his hand, and the echoes of his hammer rang from the caverns of Stonehelm to the shores of Cape Kraken. In the depths of winter's hush, Gendry Baratheon vowed that no force, be it Ironborn, Dornish spear, or Shadow of Dragons, would shatter the unity he had wrought. For a kingdom built by many could weather any storm, and he, born of forge and blood, would wield that unity as the greatest weapon of all. Aika. Da. Gendry felt the weight of every gaze as the embers of the great hall's torches guttered in the chill night air. The Storm Council's success had kindled hope, but amidst the feast and revelry, subtle undercurrents stirred. Whispers of the Golden Company's approach had turned from distant rumor to pressing worry. Envoys from Dorne had arrived bearing gifts and guarded smiles, and the quiet shadow of King's Landing's ambition hovered at the edge of every rumor-laden corner. In the flicker of candlelight, Gendry sensed that unity, once won, must be relentlessly guarded. He slipped away from the laughter of knights and traders, walking the silent ramparts under a sky bright with stars. Below, Storm's End's walls embraced long rows of tents where knights and commoners alike slept beneath the banners they had chosen. In the courtyard beyond, the wind carried a lullaby of sea and stone. Gendry paused at a crenelle, leaning against cold granite, and in the hush of winter's breath, allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The first storm he had weathered was the Ironborn's raid. The next, the Marshers' uprising. Then the friction of emboldened Crownlander knights, and the forging of the Storm Council itself. Yet each victory had only deepened the land's reliance upon him, and each reliance sharpened the knives of envy and ambition. He closed his eyes and pictured Daenerys, to whom he owed his knighting, ruling from afar in her city of ebony and pearls. He owed her fealty, yes, but he also owed his people the defense of their own shores. A new balance must be struck. A soft tread behind him made him turn. Rosamund stood there, wrapped in furs, her face alight with concern. "You should rest, my lord," she said. "Tomorrow, you ride to parley with the Dornish envoy." Gendry shook his head. "I cannot sleep while so many threats loom. The Golden Company may land on our southern coves any day. And the Cairn's envoy warned that the Dornish Prince Martin sees our unity as a threat to his own designs. He will press for marriage alliances and trade concessions that might bind us to Dornish aims." She came to stand beside him, eyes on the waves far below. "You have shown strength among your own. In Dorne, you will show it beyond. Speak truth to Prince Martin. Storm's End will accept friendship, not subjugation." Then, Gendry exhaled, remembered the weight of oaths he had already given. "I will need your counsel." She offered him a faint smile. "And mine you shall have." At first light, Gendry and Rosamund rode southward, cutting across moor and forest until the southern pass opened upon wet sand dunes and the vivid blue of the summer sea. There, beneath fluttering tents and a white pavilion emblazoned with the red sun and spear of House Martin, Prince Martin himself stood awaiting them. Tall and lean, clad in pale silk and studs of red jasper, he extended a gloved hand with practiced courtesy. "Sir Gendry, Lady of Tarth," he greeted. "The Storm's End's reputation precedes it. May our people's alliance be as steadfast as the tides." Gendry nodded. "I come seeking friendship and trade, not fetters or fealty. The Stormlands stand on their own strength." Martin's scarlet gaze flicked to Rosamund. "Yet every realm benefits from ties of marriage and commerce. Your new counsel intrigues me. It suggests a land both wise and united. Such a land could choose Dorne as ally. Or rival. Rosamund met his stare evenly. We choose a partner, not a pawn. The prince inclined his head. Then let us speak of commerce. My ports will welcome your ships if tariffs are arranged fairly, and in return I ask only that your Storm Council seat one of House Martin's stewards for matters of southbound grain and salt trade. Gendry exchanged a glance with Rosamund. If he acceded, Dorne would have a voice in his council. But if he refused, he risked alienating fertile ports and seasoned sailors. He drew a breath. We will admit one steward, provided he answers to the Storm Council, and all treaties require ratification by the Council's vote. Martin's lips curved in a thin smile. A fair compromise. Then may both our realms prosper. The envoy departed as dusk dimmed the dunes. Gendry and Rosamund made camp under starlit sky. Around them, Dornish tents glowed like lanterns, and in the distance, the silhouette of a lone ship cut across silvered water. Gendry unsealed a cask of wine and handed Rosamund a cup. To unity beyond our borders, he toasted. She clinked her cup to his. To strength and wisdom. In the glow of their shared fire, they spoke of plans. The need to bolster coastal defenses, to train a naval contingent from Estermon's gifted galleys, to fortify the southern inlets against the Golden Company. They plotted the first equinox muster, when archer, pikeman, and rider would gather at Storm's End to pledge arms and oaths. Yet beneath their strategizing lay an unspoken question. Was the young lord prepared to stand against not only external foes, but the envy and intrigue that rose within the council itself? For power, once dispersed, could breed more conflict than unity, if not tempered by unyielding resolve. They returned to Storm's End under a gale-driven blizzard. The battlements were half buried in snowdrifts. Torches flared like beacons against the white. Back in the Great Hall, the Storm Council was convening to debate the port treaty. Delegates filled the benches, knights in furs, marshers wrapped in reed cloth, merchants in brocade, septons in their gray habits. Gendry took the high seat. Rosamund stood at his side. Before him, the steward of House Martin rose to plead his case. Expanded southern trade routes, minimal tariffs, shared customs houses. When he sat, the weaver of stony sept, her hands roughened by loom and loom oil, stood to counter. She feared foreign influence on local markets, the loss of livelihood to Dornish silks and spice. For hours the debate raged. Gendry watched as voices rose in passion and reason alike. When at last the din subsided, he stood. Who among you believes the treaty advances the common good? Hands rose. Some swiftly, some hesitant. Who believes it risks our sovereignty? Other hands, mostly from inland counties untouched by coastal trade. Gendry let the weight of opposing votes settle, then pronounced, by majority, the Dornish treaty is ratified. Let House Martin's steward take his council seat as agreed. We will monitor trade and may propose adjustments next equinox. A murmur rippled through the hall. Some voices cheered, others sighed. But the law had held, forged in debate, enacted by vote. Gendry felt both pride and the sting of those who would oppose him when interests diverged. Weeks later, as frost clung to every banner, a raven arrived bearing Daenerys' seal. Gendry read her letter by candlelight. She praised his governance, yet instructed him to send a portion of his grain stores to her city, where the people starved under war's shadow. She demanded tribute, reminding him that the Iron Throne sanctioned his knighting. The price of rebellion, she implied, was eternal fealty. His hand tightened around the parchment. In the margins, Rosamund had jotted, "Advice?" He stared at those lines, the flicker of torchlight dancing in the ink. Sending grain would deplete his winter stores. Refusal risked her ire, and the Crown's armies. He looked up at Rosamund's calm face. We must respond with honor and strength. Remit 1 month's reserve, no more, and affirm our loyalty as bannermen to the Crown. But we will not weaken our people to fill distant coffers. She nodded. And we send word that Storm's End stands with the Iron Throne, but not at the expense of its own. Gendry rose, resolve steelier than any blade hammered at Smith's Row. Tomorrow, he would write his reply, sealing it with his own sigil. In that seal lay the boundary between honor and subjugation, between unity within and defiance without. As the wind howled beyond the walls, Gendry Baratheon, hammerborn, knighted, leader of the Stormlands, felt the forging of his destiny advance to a new crucible. The storms without and within threatened to break every alliance, but he would hold fast. For the unity of his people, the code of his council, and the promise of the hammered will that had forged Storm's End could not be undone by distant commands. In that knowledge lay the true measure of his knighthood, to serve the land, rather than be served by a throne half a world away, and to wield his hammer of justice against any who would threaten the realm he had built. And shall? Gendry's reply to Queen Daenerys rode north on Dornish swiftwings, courteous, firm, pledging his fealty in word but not in substance. He dispatched 1 month's grain to King's Landing, as promised, and reminded her grace that the Stormlands were bound by law to feed their own first. Days later came her answer. Acceptance, provided Storm's End contributed naval support against the looming threat of the Golden Company. It was a demand he could not meet without stripping his coasts bare, so Gendry steeled himself to refuse. He called the Storm Council to meet on an icy dawn in the Great Hall. Flickering braziers threw long shadows over hooded delegates. He rose, shoulders squared. "I heard the Crown's need," he said, voice echoing stone. "Yet the Golden Company stands at our southern shores, and to strip our coasts of ships will invite ruin upon our people. I will not sacrifice the Stormlands' defense for courts we trust at half measure." "Meow." A murmur rose among the lords. The Tarth contingent bristled in Rosamund's wake. Grainmasters traded uneasy glances. Then the weaver of stony sept rose, cloak heavy with frost. "My lord," she said, "would you risk the Queen's goodwill? A broken promise could invite her wrath, and with it, her dragons." Gendry met her gaze. "My oath to Daenerys is sacred, but my first oath is to these lands. If I must stand against her, then so be it. Storm's End holds its own, or it falls." He let his words hang like ice on air. "Is this the will of the council?" Silence, then slow nods. Sir Rollo cleared his throat. "The defense of our people ranks above distant courts. We stand with Lord Baratheon." Cheers rippled through the chamber. Gendry bowed once sharply. "Then we ride tonight," he declared. "By moonrise, every ship that can bear arms must be at Cape Wrath. We will intercept the Golden Company before it lands. At sea, if we can, or in open battle on the shore." Then, under a high moon, banners snapping in the midnight wind, Gendry mustered what fleet he could. 3 Estermont galleys, 2 swift Dornish brigs, and a dozen sturdy fishing longships converted for war. Rosamund oversaw the loading of spears and scales of chainmail. Sir Rollo briefed the captains on signal lanterns and boarding tactics. A falling tide exposed rocky shoals, the only place the company might land unseen. Gendry climbed the forecastle of the lead galley, wind ripping his cloak. Behind him, the lights of Cape Wrath gleamed faintly, and on the horizon, the dull glimmer of oars. "They come," he said, voice carried on salt and sky. "Form the line. Spear-ready men." They met the company's advance guard, as dawn's first light washed blood-red across the sea. White banners emblazoned with crossed keys fluttered from iron-capped bows. Their mercenaries fought with desperate courage, heavy steel against lighter arms, and for every man Gendry lost, he felled 2. The decks became slick with spray and blood. Gendry led the boarding party himself, leaping onto the enemy's forecastle, sword upraised. Around them, his knights pressed forward until the company's line broke. Survivors retreated to their brigantines, some drowned in the surf. Gendry spurred his galley onto the beach, sand yielding beneath iron-shod hooves. He strode ashore with Rosamund and Rollo at his back. Before them lay a tented camp, piles of broken barrels and discarded gear. A lone sergeant squinted through the haze. "Their captain rides to parley. He seeks terms." Gendry nodded. "Let him find mercy or steel, whichever he least expects. Moments later, a tall, scarred man in black and white armor approached on a gray destrier. His voice was rough as flint. "Baratheon," he spat. "The Golden Company honors its contracts. If you would bar us, you die." Gendry dismounted, stepping into the rain-swept sand. "You claimed these shores by contract with the crown. I claim them by right of spear and stone. Leave now, and keep your men's lives. Refuse, and we end your contract here." The mercenary's eyes flicked to Rosamund, then back. In that hesitation lay defeat. He bowed a terrible nod. "We march back to sea. No more will the Golden Company shadow your shores." When the victorious fleet limped back to Storm's End, the winter sun shone pale and cold. Gendry stood on the quay as battered oars splashed, and captains slung their dead into the sea with a prayer. On the quay, the Storm Council awaited. Delegates in heavy cloaks, faces grim yet proud. Gendry stepped forward. "You have seen what happens when we unite," he said. "Not by oath alone, but by hammer and spear. The Golden Company tested us and found our will unbroken. Let that be a warning to every foe. Storm's End stands, and its lord stands with it." Nender. There was thunderous applause. Rosamund caught his hand, squeezing it. In her eyes lay love and respect forged in every trial. That evening, after the wounded had been tended, Gendry retreated to the smithy. He lifted his hammer and struck a glowing billet of steel, sparks dancing like fireflies. Each blow rang with all he had endured. The forges of Flea Bottom, the bleached stones of the marsh, the clash of shields on the shore. In the red heat, there was solace, and in the metal, a promise. That steel could shape the future as surely as words. Beyond the anvil's song, he heard Rosamund's soft approach. She wrapped a thick cloak around his shoulders. "You have done more than any Baratheon before you," she whispered. "Together, we have forged unity where none existed." He set the hammer down and turned to face her, steel still glowing amber in the hearth. "This is but the beginning," he said, voice low with resolve. "Westermen plot, the Dornish watch, the crown waits. Yet when the age of storms returns, the Stormlands will not break beneath the wind. We will bend it to our will." "Ben?" She smiled and brushed ash from his cheek. "Then let us meet the dawn, and every dawn after, with that same will." He raised his hammer once more, then struck the steel with measured force. The ring echoed through the empty smithy, a clarion call to every heart in the Stormlands, that from fire and fury, rain and ruin, a new age had been forged, and Gendry Baratheon would wield its hammer until the last storm passed beyond the horizon. Okay. I know. The dawn that followed the rout of the Golden Company was mercifully clear. The sky above Storm's End washed in pale winter light. Snow crusted the battlements and drifts lay heavy along the causeway, but in the great hall, a fire burned bright. Chests of salted fish and cured venison piled high, and the roar of voices spoke of hope rather than hunger. Gendry Baratheon stood at the dais once more, his dark hair flecked with snow, the black stag on gold gleaming across his breast. Around him rose the assembled Storm Council. Knights in frost-flecked armor, marshers cloaked in reeds, merchants in furs, and septons in gray wool. He let the cheers fade into silence, gauging each face with the gravity of his task. "We have proven that unity by steel holds any foe at bay," he began, voice resonant in the vaulted chamber. "But steel rusts, and unity frays when we neglect its forge. Today, we must bind ourselves anew, toward rebuilding, consolidation, and the peace our people deserve." He paused to let those words settle. "I propose 3 measures. First, the establishment of the Stormwatch, an order of knights drawn from every holdfast, sworn to patrol our roads and coasts. Second, the creation of a grain reserve overseen by elected stewards, to guarantee relief in famine. And third, the founding of a winter's court, to hear petitions of law and settle disputes, so that no man travels road or... Lady Rosamund rose to her feet beside him. "I will raise the first knights for the Stormwatch," she pledged. "Each house shall send a champion to be tried by merit, not birth. A veteran knight, Sir Arlen Blackwood, rasped from the back. And I will train them in siegecraft and seamanship, that they may be as comfortable on ship as on stone. The weaver of Stony Sept spoke for the grain reserve. We marshers and farmers will oversee seed stores in every shire. No man goes hungry under Storm's End's banner. Thou. And the Septon of the stranger's abode declared, Winter's court shall be held each moon, in rotating keeps, with nobles, commoners, and septons as judges, so that law carries both mercy and justice. Gendry nodded, chest swelling with satisfaction. Then it is settled. He struck the iron anvil once more, its ring a promise. Let Stormwatch ride, let grain be guarded, and let justice be heard. We build not a fiefdom of fear, but a realm of hope. Over the weeks that followed, Storm's End teemed with activity akin to a well-oiled smithy. Sir Arlen drilled the first Stormwatch recruits in melee and maritime tactics. Young squires who had never ridden a galley's deck now leapt from plank to plank under oarsmen's cheers. Lady Rosamond oversaw tournaments to test worthiness for the watch, often besting challengers 3 times her size with crackling skill. Marshers and farmers convened in outlying granaries, where they measured the year's yield against projected need, bundling seed wheat to restock fields come spring. And at every full moon, Winter's court sat, first beneath the arches of Griffin's Roost, then at Rain House, then at Stony Sept, resolving land disputes, punishing profiteers, and freeing those unjustly bound. Gendry himself rode with the Stormwatch twice, inspecting patrols along reclaimed roads where potholes lay drowned beneath ice and bridges snapped by last winter's frost. In each village he heard the same refrain, "The roads are safe now, my lord." He answered them simply, "Because we ride together," knowing that unity born of common purpose yet tempered by accountability could endure beyond any storm. One crisp morning, as falcons wheeled overhead and the sea mist curled against the walls, a messenger arrived from King's Landing. His banner bore the red 3-headed dragon. Gendry received him in the solar, where Rosamond read the scroll by firelight. The Queen, impressed by his governance, offered Storm's End a seat on her small council to advise on matters of the realm. In return, she sought not tribute but loyalty, wishing to bind the Stormlands more closely to the crown. The offer was a rare honor, yet one fraught with peril. A position on the small council would bring him into the deadly politics of the Red Keep. He closed the letter, eyes thoughtful. "The realm is wider than our storms," he said. "To protect our people, we must speak for them where kings and queens decide fates. But to take that seat may draw us into quarrels that sap our strength." Rosamond placed a steady hand on his arm. Better to shape policy from within than to be subject to its whims. Sir Rollo, standing in the corner, interjected, "Then, I would go as your voice in King's Landing. You remain here, guiding the Stormlands, free from courtly snares." Gendry regarded him, the loyalty in Rolla's stance as solid as any armor. He glanced at Rosamond. She inclined her head. At last he spoke. "Sir Rollo shall serve as our proxy on the small council. He knows our code and our land. He will speak boldly for our people." He drafted a reply: acceptance of the seat, delegation of his proxy, and an invitation for the Queen's Chancellor to visit Storm's End at the spring equinox. With that dispatch sent, Gendry turned his focus back to home. The storms of politics raged as fiercely as any gale, but his realm had grown stronger. Roads mended, laws upheld, coasts guarded, and hearts warmed by shared purpose. In his forge, day and night, he hammered at new laws and charters, the sparks dancing like stars freed from the heavens. Spring's first buds appeared in the woodlands when the Chancellor arrived, a stern woman draped in black satin, face as unyielding as Winterfell's gates. She toured Storm's End with dispassionate courtesy, noting the Stormwatch's discipline, the granary's abundance, the Winter's court's order. At each step, Gendry presented his progress. A realm rebuilt from turmoil into a beacon of stability. In return, the Chancellor offered congratulations and discreet praise, hinting that Storm's End's model might serve as a blueprint for other regions long torn by strife. When finally she requested audience, they met in Gendry's solar. overlooking the sea. Snowdrops nodded at the window ledge. Gulls wheeled below. She cleared her throat. "Lord Baratheon, the realm is indebted to your leadership. The Queen commends you." Yet the North stirs. An heir to Winterfell whispers of independence, and the Reach seethes under new rule. "We would send envoys to Storm's End, that they learn from your council's model. Will you host them?" "Not you." Gendry met her cool gaze. "The Stormlands owe no neighbor except courtesy and commerce. I will open our gates to those who seek counsel, but not to those who would lease our methods to subvert their own lands without goodwill." The Chancellor inclined her head, respect glinting in her eyes. "Then Storm's End stands as a bastion of order in a restless realm. May your example guide the realm back to unity." Now, summer dawned in fleeting warmth, and news arrived that Winterfell's heir had risen in defiance, claiming that the North answered to no southern crown. Gendry convened his council by Raven. Though the North's conflict lay far north of his marshes, he knew that unrest in one region threatened all. He dispatched envoys offering mediation, and detail from the Stormwatch trained as diplomats rather than swordsmen. He also bolstered defenses at the neck should refugees pour southward. At the same time, Dornish traders arrived with saffron and spiced wine, while Tarthas shipwrights sent timber for a new watchtower at Cape Wrath. Each envoy he received not as subject, but as equal partner. Storm's End would trade grain for goods, send diplomats for negotiations, and share the methods of Winter's court in exchange for knowledge of architecture and irrigation. In the evenings, Gendry and Rosamund retreated to the smithy's hush. Hammer in hand, he would shape new ordinances, on trade, on inheritance, on the rights of those who tilled land. She would trace their lines, ensuring clarity and fairness. In that quiet forge, they wove the tapestry of governance, metal and ink, fire and thought, each complementing the other. It was in one such evening that Gendry paused mid-strike, feeling the rhythm of hammer upon steel falter. He turned to Rosamund, her pen poised over parchment. "I remember the boy I was, swinging hammers in Flea Bottom, dreaming only of survival," he said softly. "Now I shape laws that outlast us both. Yet I fear complacency. Power unused decays, like steel left unburnished." "Dawn." She set her quill aside and met his eyes. "Then we sharpen it together, day by day. As the storms return to these shores, we will be ready, Storm's End and all its people, bound by the code you forged in fire and mercy." He lifted his hammer once more, hearing in its ring the echo of every challenge overcome. Outside, the tide turned against the shore, and gulls cried as if heralding a new age. Within, the forge's embers glowed with promise. That from humble origins a kingdom could rise, that a lord born of ash and anvil could shape not only steel, but the destiny of men, and that Gendry Baratheon, standing amid hammer and hearth, would wield his legacy with unwavering resolve. For every dawn, for every storm, for every beating heart. Aika. Ndi. Continuing the tale of Gendry Baratheon's rise and the forging of a new Stormlands, I'll carry the story forward in roughly 2,000-word installments to ensure readability and continuity. Here is the next installment. Please let me know when you're ready for the following part. He awoke before dawn, long before the final embers of night had fled the sky. In the hush of his solar, candlelight trembled upon parchment. Outside, only the faintest whisper of wind stirred the banners high upon the walls. Gendry Baratheon rose from his seat. Shoulders heavy with the weight of Winter's court. The Stormwatch, and the web of alliances he had spun, yet in his chest, alongside worry, glowed the resolute spark that had carried him from Smith's apprentice to Lord of the Stormlands. Across the chamber, Rosamund stirred, still draped in furs, studying her quill and scroll, as though it were a blade she might need at any moment. He stepped to her side. "Another treaty to review?" he asked quietly. She looked up, pale dawn light in her eyes. "A delegation from the Reach arrives at midday. House Tarly and House Hightower." They wish to learn of our winter's court, though some say they seek to undermine it. She slid a folded scroll across the table. Your letter to Highgarden drew their curiosity. They've sent envoys. He laid a hand atop hers. We forged this court for justice, not for politicking. We'll show them its strength by example, not by bending to their whims. She nodded, and together they spoke quietly of preparations, where the Reach envoy would meet the Storm Council, how to arrange accommodations so as not to overwhelm their hospitality, and which charges at Winter's court to highlight as models of fair judgment. By midday, the high bridge of Storm's End thronged with cloaks of green and gold. A proud formal retinue headed by Sir Roland Tarley, heir to Horn Hill, and Lady Marjorie Hightower, envoy of Old Town. They were met by the Stormwatch, an honor guard of 20 knights in black and gold, sidearms sheathed, but hands resting on hilts, banners snapping in the wind. Gendry himself rode forth to greet them, plate glinting with the stag's image, his helm under one arm. My lords, he intoned, voice carrying over the gathered crowd. Welcome to Storm's End. May our courts and our halls serve you well. Roland bowed, the proud set of his jaw softened by respect. Lord Baratheon, your reputation for fair rule precedes you. We have come to witness it, for the good of our own people. Ben? Margaery offered a polite curtsy, her eyes sweeping the battlements. We are honored. The Winter's Court's judgments are said to carry more weight than scrolls or seals. Gendry inclined his head. Then you shall see justice not as decree, but as it breathes, in debate, in compassion, and in firm resolution. He led them through the gate into the courtyard beyond, where banners and tents had been set for this very purpose. A wooden dais rose at the center. Seats for the council stewards, benches for petitioners and spectators. At one end stood the anvil, symbol of the forge that forged not only steel, but laws themselves. Inside the pavilion, delegates of the Storm Council filed into place. A marshaller in chain, a blacksmith with soot-stained hands, a widow in simple wool, and 2 septons whose calm presence steadied the place. In all, 18 voices awaited the proceedings. Gendry tapped the anvil with his hammer. Let the Winter's Court convene. The hush that followed was absolute. First came a petition, a land dispute between 2 minor houses of the marsh, each claiming rights to an inlet where reeds grew thick for basket making. Roland Tarley watched intently as the weaver, her hands steady, spoke of ancient tradition. Then the fisher, his voice trembling with fear of losing his livelihood, countered with practical need. The septon's gentle questions guided them toward common ground, that the marsh must both feed and clothe its people. In the end, the court decreed that the reeds be shared seasonally, spring harvest for the Weavers' Guild, autumn harvest for the fishermen, under Stormwatch oversight to prevent conflict. Margaery's pale lips curved in quiet approval. Roland nodded, pen scratching in his hand as he recorded the judgment. One by one cases passed before the court. A complaint of overzealous toll collectors along the Roserad, resolved by ordering fines refunded and collectors retrained. A merchant's plea that foreign traders undercut local craftsmen with low-quality imports, settled by enacting standards and certifications. And finally, a widow's appeal for rightful inheritance, granted with the Storm Council's seal to protect her lands from would-be opportunists. When the last gavel fell, Gendry stood. Let it be known that in Storm's End, law lives. May other courts learn from these seeds that have now taken root. He beckoned Roland and Margaery forward. My lords of the Reach, how do you judge what you have seen? Roland stepped to the dais. Your court blends mercy and resolve. An art we would see in Highgarden. I shall recommend its study to my father. Margaery spoke next. Order such as this fosters loyalty. May it prosper in our lands as it has here. Gendry inclined his head. Then let our alliance be bound by law, as surely as by land and lance. That night, under torchlight in the High Hall, Gendry and Rosamund held a private feast for their guests. Meats smoked over hickory embers, venison stews scented with rosemary, and flagons of pale honey wine glowed in every hand. Laughter rose as the Reach envoys spoke of courtly intrigues in King's Landing, and Gendry regaled them with tales of forging steel in Flea Bottom. Rosamund, seated beside Margaery, watched the interplay of personalities. "They will remember this night," she whispered to her lord. "They've tasted our hospitality and seen our justice. Storm's End will be their standard." Gendry nodded, amber eyes reflecting the firelight. "Tomorrow we ride for Highgarden. I will speak with Lord Tarly and Lady Hightower about exporting our court's writ across the kingdoms." Before dawn the next day, Gendry's host rode southward under crisp air. The causeway slipped into rolling farmland and vineyards, where frost-silvered vines shimmered in the morning light. Along the way, peasants on carts dipped their heads as the column passed. Small folk gathered at crossroads to watch the storm's banners glide past. Even the Reach canopies, always confident, milked their horses' paces as though mindful of Baratheon's presence. When they reached Horn Hill, Sir Roland's family keep, Lady Mina Tarly greeted them in its sunlit courtyard. Her flaxen hair gleamed with frost crystals. Her eyes held the mix of welcome and wonder befitting a matriarch meeting a storied leader. "Sir Gendry, Lady Rosamund," she said, curtsying. "Our lands are your lands this day. Rest, eat, and plan as you will." Then Gendry dismounted, clasping Mina's hand. "Your hospitality honors us. Tomorrow, my lords, we ride to Highgarden itself." That evening, seated with Lords Tarly and Hightower over roasted capon and spiced wine, Gendry laid out the structure of Winter's Court, the authority of the Stormwatch, and the success of the grain reserves. Roland spoke first. "In Horn Hill, disputes cost lives and coin. If your court can spare a judge and bind our people to law, we will welcome it." Margaery added, "Highgarden scholars will document your code. We propose sending 10 septons and 10 scribes to Storm's End. Your archives shall become our curriculum." Then away. The lords of the Reach pressed glasses together. "To the Stormlands for showing us the way." Gendry lifted his own cup. "May law spread like seeds in spring, sown in every shire, reaped by every hand." He met Rosamund's gaze. The Forge-born lord and the Sea-born lady, partners in peace and power. Spring's dawn found Highgarden surrounded by Stormwatch banners and the sigils of the Reach. A grand pavilion rose upon the terraces, panels carved with the stag and rose entwined. The first joint session of Winter's Court for the Reach convened beneath the black oak, a tree older than most kingdoms. Delegates in Reach Green and Stormlands Black gathered, voices rising in trial and council. Gendry sat at the bench beside Lord Tarly, hammer and gavel in hand. He watched as 2 small lords of the Reach, one accusing the other of poaching deer, spoke through spurred reproach and timid pleas. Then a septon asked questions, and the judgment came. A shared hunt schedule, fines for unlawful slaying, and the replacement of every deer killed outside season. In the hush, a bond passed between lands, justice administered by many, honored by all. In the weeks that followed, Winter's Court circuits rolled through the Reach, Castle Hayne, Harrenhal, Old Stones. Each session forging alliances anew. Stormwatch squadrons sailed the Mander, securing trade barges. Grain reserves from Horn Hill sustained Storm's End stores, and envoys returned with promises of friendship from lords who once saw Baratheon's rise with suspicion. Back at Storm's End, Gendry and Rosamund walked among the fields where spring shoots peeked through thawing earth. The forge's hammer lay silent in the warmed smithy. Instead, he held Rosamund's hand, listening to the hum of life stirring beneath the soil. "We built a court, a watch, and reserves," he said softly. "Now we have built trust." She leaned on his shoulder. "And soon, my lord, the whole realm may learn that peace is forged, not by sword alone, but by law, mercy, and unity." He closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of new grass and sea salt. Beyond the hills, Winterfell's conflict raged. Beyond that, the wheel of power spun in King's Landing. But here, in the heart of a land once torn, Gendry Baratheon had built a new order, one that carried the promise of spring even amid the scars of winter. And as dawn's first song rose from the fields, he knew the greatest challenge lay ahead, to bind all Westeros to this same code of justice and mercy. But for now, he allowed himself the rarest gift of all: hope.